I thought being the oldest son meant something. But when my parents clinked their champagne glasses at their 40th anniversary party and announced they were leaving their entire $74 million empire to my younger brother, I realized I'd been living a lie for 35 years. My name is Donovan Harwick. You probably haven't heard of me, but if you've built a house anywhere in New England in the last 40 years, you've used our lumber. Harwick Industries was supposed to be mine. I'd earned it with 2 decades of 16-hour days, splinters in my hands, and sawdust in my lungs. While my brother Preston was at Harvard learning about theoretical business models, I was in the mills at 5 a.m. learning the actual business. But standing in that ballroom, watching my parents hand over everything to him, without even glancing in my direction, I finally understood the truth. Some children are born to inherit. Others are born to build what someone else will inherit. They'd decided which one I was the day Preston came home from the hospital. What they didn't know was that someone had been watching them play this sick game for decades. And that night, while everyone was toasting Preston's fortune, a stranger would hand me proof that would destroy every lie my parents had built their empire on. My father, Sterling Harwick, stood at that microphone like a king addressing his subjects. 6'3", silver-haired, with hands that could still crush yours in a handshake despite his 68 years. He'd built our lumber empire from a single sawmill in Rutland to operations across 3 states. Next to him, my mother Beatrice looked every inch the former Miss Vermont she'd been in 1978. Even at 65, she commanded attention in her silver gown, her smile perfect and cold as winter marble. Our son Preston, my father said, his voice filling the ballroom, embodies everything Harwick Industries needs for the future. Preston stood there in his Italian suit, his Harvard class ring catching the light, his perfect white smile flashing for the crowd. 32 years old, never worked a day of manual labor in his life, but somehow he was the future. And me? I was just the ghost who'd been keeping that future profitable for the past 20 years. I watched my wife Mallory's face crumble as the words sank in. Our daughter Sophie, only 8 years old, tugged at my sleeve. "Daddy, why didn't Grandpa say your name?" That's when I knew I had to leave. Not just the party, maybe everything. But walking out of that ballroom would be the best decision I ever made. Because in the parking lot, a woman named Nadira Kelvin was waiting with a folder that contained 3 things. Photos that would prove my brother Preston wasn't who he thought he was. Documents that would reveal my parents had been living a massive lie since before I was born. And a will that would change everything. The funny thing about family fortunes is they're built on stories. The story of hard work, dedication, and passing success from one generation to the next. But what happens when the story itself is a lie? What happens when the eldest son discovers he's not just the firstborn, but the only real heir to an empire built on deception? That night, I thought I'd lost everything. Instead, I was about to discover that my parents' greatest fear wasn't that I'd fail to live up to the Harwick name. It was that I'd finally learn I was the only true Harwick left. The morning of my parents' anniversary party started like any other Saturday in October. Vermont's maple trees were showing off their autumn colors, painting the mountains in shades of fire. I was up at dawn, not because I had to be, but because 20 years of rising early for work had programmed my body to reject sleeping in. Mallory was still asleep beside me, her dark hair spread across the pillow, one arm draped protectively over the space where Sophie usually crawled in around midnight. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," Mallory said, not opening her eyes. I stopped pacing. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you." "You've been restless all week, Dawn. What's going on?" I sat on the edge of the bed studying my hands. They were my father's hands, large and scarred from years of real work. Dad's been having meetings with Preston every day this week, private ones. And yesterday I saw Harrison Brenner's car in the driveway. "The estate lawyer?" "Yeah." I turned to face her. "Something big is happening, Mal. I can feel it." She sat up, touching my face gently. Maybe they're finally going to announce your promotion. You've basically been running the company for the past 5 years anyway. That was true. While my father played golf with investors and Preston networked at country clubs, I managed our 3 mills, negotiated with suppliers, handled the unions, and kept our biggest clients happy. When Holbrook Construction threatened to switch suppliers last year, I personally drove to Boston in a snowstorm to save the contract. When our Montpelier mill had that fire, I spent 3 months sleeping in a trailer on site to oversee the rebuild. Maybe, I said, but something felt wrong. The Harwick estate sat on 200 acres of prime Vermont land, with the main house presiding over it all like a benevolent dictator. Growing up there should have felt like a fairy tale, and for Preston, it probably did. He got the writing lessons, the ski trips to Aspen, the summers in Europe. I got summer jobs at the mill starting at 14, learning the business from the ground up because, as my father always said, the oldest son needs to know every inch of what he'll inherit. By noon, the event planners had transformed the estate into something from a magazine. White tents dotted the lawn, crystal chandeliers hung from oak trees, and a string quartet was warming up near the fountain my mother had imported from Italy. I found my Uncle Vaughn, my father's younger brother, supervising the bar setup. "Donovan," he clapped me on the shoulder. "Ready for the big night?" "Ready as I'll ever be. You know what Dad's planning to announce." Vaughn's smile faltered for just a second. "Your father keeps his own counsel, you know that, but whatever happens, remember, that family is family." It was an odd thing to say, but before I could ask what he meant, Preston appeared with his girlfriend, Isabel something or other, daughter of a state senator. She looked like she'd been ordered from a catalog titled Future Political Wives, all pearl earrings and practiced smiles. "Donovan," Preston said, that Harvard accent he'd cultivated making my name sound like a disease. "Father wants to see you in his study. Now." He said it was important. I found my father in his study, standing by the window that overlooked the mills in the distance. The room smelled of leather, and the Cuban cigars he claimed he'd quit smoking. "You wanted to see me?" He didn't turn around. "Donovan, you've been a good soldier. I want you to know that." "A soldier? You've done what was asked of you. Learned the business. Kept things running. Your mother and I appreciate that." The way he said it, like he was thanking an employee for their years of service, made my stomach tighten. "Dad, what's going on?" He finally turned, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes that might have been regret. "Tonight, your mother and I will be making an announcement about the future of Harwick Industries. I want you to understand that every decision we've made has been for the good of the family legacy." "Our family?" "The Harwick name, that's what matters, the name and what it represents." He moved to his desk, fingers trailing over a photograph of him and Preston at Preston's Harvard graduation. There were no pictures of me in this room, I realized, not one. "I should go help Mallory get Sophie ready," I said. "Donovan?" He stopped me at the door. "Whatever happens tonight, remember that you've always had a place in this company." Had, past tense. That single word told me everything I needed to know, and yet I still walked into that party hoping I was wrong. Hope, I would learn that night, is just delayed disappointment dressed in its Sunday best. The ballroom was packed by 8 o'clock. 200 of Vermont's elite had gathered to celebrate Sterling and Beatrice Harwick's 4 decades of marriage and success. I stood near the bar, nursing a scotch I didn't want, watching Preston work the room like a politician. Every handshake calculated, every laugh perfectly timed. He'd learned well at Harvard, but not about lumber. About power. "Daddy, can I have another Shirley Temple?" Sophie appeared at my side, her green dress already wrinkled from playing with her cousins. "Last one, sweetheart. It's almost past your bedtime." "But Grandma said there's going to be a big announcement, please." I looked across the room where my mother held court with her garden club friends. She caught my eye and quickly looked away. In 20 years of working for my father, she'd never once asked how my day was, never once said she was proud of me. But Preston? Preston could sneeze, and she'd call it brilliant. "Uncle Donovan!" My cousin Garrett's kids ran up, chocolate smeared on their faces. "Grandpa Vaughn says you built a treehouse at the mill. Can we see it tomorrow?" "Sure, if your parents say it's okay." This was my role in the family. The one who built things, fixed things, made things work. The reliable one, the one who didn't need attention or praise because the work itself was supposed to be enough. My father's voice suddenly boomed through the microphone, commanding instant silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family, thank you for joining Beatrice and me on this momentous occasion." Mallory appeared beside me, sliding her hand into mine. "This is it," she whispered. 40 years ago, Sterling continued, I married the most beautiful woman in Vermont. Together, we built something extraordinary. Not just a business, but a legacy. Harwick Industries now employs over 3,000 people across New England. We've weathered recessions, competition, and changing markets. But we've thrived because we've always known one truth. Family comes first. The crowd murmured approval. I straightened my tie, preparing to step forward when he called my name. Which is why, my mother took the microphone, her diamonds catching the light like tiny stars. We've spent months considering the future of everything we've built. The decision wasn't easy, but it was clear. The world is changing, my father said, reclaiming the microphone. Harwick Industries needs leadership that understands modern business, international markets, digital transformation. It needs someone with the right education, the right connections, the right vision. My chest tightened. Preston was already moving toward the stage, that satisfied smile playing at his lips. Therefore, Beatrice and I have decided to leave everything. The company, the estate, our entire portfolio, all $74 million of it to our son. Sterling paused, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing on Preston. Preston, Sterling Harwick. The applause was immediate and thunderous. Preston bounded onto the stage, hugging both parents while cameras flashed. I stood frozen, the Scotch glass trembling in my hand. Mallory's grip on my other hand was the only thing keeping me anchored. "Did you hear that?" someone behind me said. 74 million. Smart choice, though. Preston's got that Harvard MBA. "And Donovan?" another voice asked. "Well, he's good with his hands, but running an empire, that takes sophistication." My mother's voice rang out again. "Preston represents the future of Harwick Industries. His education at Harvard Business School, his understanding of global markets, his connections throughout New England society, these are the tools that will carry our family legacy into the next generation." "What about Donovan?" someone shouted from the crowd. I couldn't see who, but I loved them for it. My father's jaw tightened. "Donovan has been a valued employee of Harwick Industries. He'll continue in his current role as mill supervisor, reporting to Preston, of course. Employee, supervisor, reporting to Preston. 20 years reduced to a job title. My birthright handed to my younger brother like a party favor." "Don, don't," Mallory whispered, but I was already moving. I pushed through the crowd, past the confused faces, and whispered speculation. My Uncle Vaughn tried to grab my arm. "Donovan, think about what you're doing." I have been thinking. For 20 years I've been thinking I mattered. I reached the edge of the stage. My parents finally looked at me, but their eyes were cold, distant, like I was a problem to be managed, not a son to be loved. "Nothing to say to me?" I asked, my voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "The decision is made," my father said simply. "Based on what?" "The fact that Preston went to Harvard while I was here, keeping your company profitable, the fact that he has connections while I have calluses." "Based on what's best for the family," my mother said, her tone dismissive. "I am family." The words erupted from me. "I'm your firstborn son. I've given everything to this company, to this family, and you stand there and call me an employee?" Preston stepped forward, that practiced smile never wavering. "Donovan, let's discuss this privately. You're making a scene." "A scene?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're right, Preston. The oldest son being completely erased from his inheritance should probably be handled quietly. Wouldn't want to upset your party." I turned and walked out, ignoring the calls behind me. The cool October air hit my face as I pushed through the doors. Behind me, I heard the quartet start playing again, my father's voice returning to the microphone, smoothing over the disruption like it never happened, like I never happened. The parking area was dark except for the occasional landscape light casting shadows between the cars. I stood by my truck, a beat-up Ford that looked embarrassingly out of place among the Mercedes and BMWs. My hands were shaking as I tried to get the key in the door. 20 years of my life, gone. Just like that. Like I was nothing more than hired help who'd gotten too comfortable. "Donovan Harwick?" I spun around. A woman stood 10 feet away, just outside the circle of light. She was maybe mid-50s, wearing a long black coat that seemed too formal even for tonight's event. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes were sharp, intelligent, watching me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "If you're a reporter, I've got nothing to say." "I'm not a reporter." She stepped closer, and I could see her face more clearly. There was something familiar about her features, though I was certain we'd never met. "My name is Nadira Kelvin. I was your parents' accountant many years ago, before you were born. Never heard of you. You wouldn't have. Your parents made sure of that." She reached into her coat and pulled out a thick manila folder. "Your Aunt Cordelia asked me to give this to you." "I don't have an Aunt Cordelia. Your father's sister. She left when you were 2 years old. Sterling and Beatrice erased her from the family history, just like they're erasing you tonight." The folder felt heavy in my hands. Why would they erase her? For the same reason they're pushing you aside now. She asked too many questions. She wouldn't play their game. Nadira's voice was steady, matter of fact. "Cordelia passed away last month in Boston, lung cancer. She never married, never had children, but she never forgot about you." "I don't understand any of this." "You will. Everything you need is in that folder. But Donovan, once you open it, there's no going back. The truth has a way of destroying comfortable lies. Lady, in case you missed it, my comfortable lies just got destroyed in front of 200 people." She almost smiled. "No, those were just the surface lies, the ones about merit and fairness and earning your place. The real lies go much deeper. They go back to before you were born, to decisions your parents made that they've been covering up ever since." "What kind of decisions?" "The kind that involved lawyers, payoffs, and falsified documents. The kind that required your Aunt Cordelia to disappear because she knew too much." She turned to leave, then paused. "Your grandfather, Theodore Harwick, was a careful man. He knew his son's nature, knew what Sterling was capable of. That's why he put safeguards in place. Legal safeguards that your parents have been desperately trying to circumvent for decades. My grandfather died when I was 10. Yes, but his will lives on. The real one, not the version your parents show people." She pulled her coat tighter against the October wind. "Read the folder, Donovan. Then call Brennan and Associates in Boston. Tell them Cordelia's nephew is ready to claim his inheritance. They'll know what to do. Wait, how do I know any of this is real? You could be anyone. This could all be some elaborate scam." Nadira looked back at me, and for the first time, her expression softened. "Your mother has a birthmark on her left shoulder blade shaped like a crescent moon. She told people it was from a childhood accident, but it's not. Your father has a scar on his right knee from when he fell off a ladder at the first mill in 1979, the same day you were born. Well, the same day they claim you were born." My blood went cold. How could you possibly know those things? Because I was there for both. I was more than their accountant, Donovan. I was their friend, until I learned what they were capable of. She started walking away. Read the folder. Everything will make sense. I sat in my truck, the dome light illuminating the folder on my lap. My phone was buzzing constantly. Mallory, probably, maybe Vaughn. People wondering where I'd gone, if I was okay, but I couldn't face any of them until I knew what was in this folder. The first document was a photograph, black and white, dated March 15, 1987. It showed my parents at a hospital. My mother was holding a baby, my father standing beside her. But something was wrong. The date was wrong. According to my birth certificate, I wasn't born until June 28, 1987. I flipped to the next page, another photo, this one in color. A young woman I didn't recognize holding the same baby, standing next to my father. She was beautiful, with dark hair and eyes that looked kind but tired. At the bottom, someone had written, Helena and Sterling with baby Donovan, March the 16th, 1987. Helena. I'd never heard that name before. The next document was a death certificate. Helena Marie Dawson died June 28, 1987. Cause of death. Complications from delayed postpartum hemorrhage. June 28th, my official birthday, the day this Helena died. My phone rang. Mallory's face appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. I needed to understand what I was reading before I could explain it to anyone else. I turned to the next page, and that's when everything I thought I knew about my life started to crumble. It was a marriage certificate dated January 3rd, 1987. Sterling Harwick and Helena Marie Dawson. My father had been married before. 3 months before I was supposedly born, he'd been married to someone else entirely. I kept reading, each page revealing another layer of deception. Hospital records from Burlington Medical Center showed Helena Dawson Harwick giving birth to a son, Donovan Theodore Harwick, on March 15, 1987. My real birthday. The attending physician's notes mentioned complications during delivery, severe hemorrhaging that required multiple transfusions. Helena had survived the birth, but barely. Then came the legal documents. A marriage certificate between Sterling Harwick and Beatrice Winthrop dated July 15, 1987, just 2 weeks after Helena's death. 2 weeks. My father had married my mother 2 weeks after his first wife died, but the adoption papers were what made my hands shake. They weren't for me. They were for Preston Sterling Harwick. Adopted December 1992. Birth mother listed as anonymous. Adoption fee listed as $50,000. My golden brother, the Harvard graduate, the chosen heir, wasn't even a Harwick by blood. A letter in elegant handwriting was paper-clipped to the adoption papers. It was from Cordelia. Donovan, if you're reading this, then Sterling and Beatrice have finally shown their true nature. The truth is simple and cruel. You are Sterling's biological son from his marriage to Helena. When she died from complications 3 months after your birth, Sterling was left with a choice. Raise you alone, or find a new mother for his infant son. Beatrice Winthrop was beautiful, ambitious, and from old money that Sterling desperately needed to expand the business. But she had one condition for marrying a widower with a baby. Any child of hers would inherit everything. Sterling agreed, probably thinking they'd have children quickly, but Beatrice couldn't conceive. After 5 years of trying, they bought Preston from a teenage mother in Boston. I confronted them when I discovered the truth. They offered me money to stay quiet. When I refused, they destroyed my reputation, claimed I'd embezzled funds, made sure I could never work in Vermont again. I left for Boston with nothing but the truth, and I've been gathering evidence ever since. I flipped to the next section, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. It was a copy of a will, but not my father's. It was my grandfather Theodore Harwick's will, dated September 3rd, 1999, 2 years before his death. One paragraph was highlighted in yellow. To prevent any confusion or manipulation regarding my estate and the future of Harwick Industries, I hereby declare that all assets, properties, and controlling interest in said company shall pass exclusively to my biological heirs. This is defined specifically as those sharing DNA lineage with myself and my son Sterling. Should Sterling attempt to circumvent this clause by favoring non-biological heirs, or should he predecease his biological children, all assets shall immediately transfer to my biological grandchildren. DNA testing shall be required to verify all claims of inheritance, with samples to be tested against my preserved DNA held in trust by Brennan and Associates of Boston. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood. My grandfather, who'd built Harwick Industries from nothing, had made sure only blood relatives could inherit. He must have known something about Sterling's character, about what he might do. The next document was a scientific report from a genetic testing company dated just 1 month ago. Cordelia had somehow gotten DNA samples tested. The results were clear. Preston Harwick showed no genetic relationship to Theodore Harwick. But there was another test result. A sample labeled DH showed a 99% probability of grandpaternal relationship to Theodore Harwick. She'd tested me. Somehow, Cordelia had gotten my DNA and confirmed what the documents showed. I was Theodore Harwick's only biological grandchild. A sticky note was attached to the genetic report. Coffee cup from Donovan taken during his visit to Burlington Medical Center February 2, 2024. Chain of custody maintained through Brennan and Associates. February 2nd. I'd been at the hospital that day for a routine insurance physical that the company required for all senior employees. Someone had taken my used coffee cup and had it tested. The final pages were financial records showing the current value of Harwick Industries and associated assets, $74 million. But more interesting were the legal briefs from Brennan and Associates outlining the case law around inheritance fraud and the criminal penalties for knowingly violating the terms of a will. My parents hadn't just disinherited me, they'd committed fraud that could land them in prison. At the very bottom of the folder was a business card for James Brennan III, senior partner, with a note. "We've been waiting for your call for 15 years. Everything is prepared." I sat back, the truth settling over me like a heavy blanket. Every insult, every dismissive look, every moment of being passed over suddenly made sense. I wasn't being punished for not being good enough. I was being punished for being too legitimate, too real, too much of a threat to the fantasy they'd built around Preston. My phone rang again. This time, it was my father. I stared at his name on the screen, wondering if he was calling to do damage control, or if someone had seen me talking to Nadira. I let it ring. Then I did something I'd never done before. I blocked his number, then my mother's. I had a different call to make. I pulled out the business card and dialed. "Brennan and Associates, emergency line," a woman's voice answered. "This is Donovan Harwick. I'm Cordelia Harwick's nephew. I'm ready to claim my inheritance." There was a pause, then, "Mr. Harwick, we've been expecting your call. Can you come to Boston tomorrow?" "I'll be there first thing in the morning." "Bring the folder and any identification you have. Mr. Brennan will clear his schedule for you." I ended the call and started the truck. As I drove away from the estate, I could see the party continuing in the ballroom, golden light spilling out into the darkness. They were celebrating Preston's inheritance, toasting to a future built on lies. They had no idea that tomorrow their entire house of cards would come crashing down. The drive home that night felt like moving through a dream. Mallory was waiting up for me, Sophie asleep on the couch beside her. I sat down and told her everything, showed her every document, watched her face cycle through the same shock, anger, and disbelief I'd experienced. "They stole your entire life," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No," I corrected her. "They tried to, but theft only works if you never get caught." The next morning, I drove to Boston while the rest of Vermont was probably gossiping about my dramatic exit from the party. James Brennan III looked exactly like what you'd expect from a Boston estate lawyer. Silver-haired, sharp-suited, with eyes that had seen every possible family betrayal over 40 years of practice. "Your Aunt Cordelia was a remarkable woman," he said, spreading out additional documents on his mahogany desk. "She spent 20 years building this case. She knew your parents would eventually show their hand, and when they did, she wanted you armed with the truth. Why didn't she just tell me herself? She tried. When you were 18, she sent you a letter. Your parents intercepted it. When you were 25, she attempted to visit you at the mill. Your father had her escorted off the property and threatened her with a restraining order. She realized the only way to help you was to wait until they destroyed themselves with their own greed. The legal process took 6 months. DNA tests confirmed what Cordelia's documents showed. I was Theodore Harwick's only biological grandchild. Preston fought it at first, hiring his own lawyers, demanding his own tests. But DNA doesn't lie, even when families do. The test came back negative for any biological relationship to the Harwick line. The fraud charges were what really destroyed my parents. Knowingly violating the terms of Theodore's will, filing false inheritance documents, attempting to transfer assets to a non-biological heir while a biological heir existed, their lawyers told them they were looking at serious prison time if they didn't settle. We met in Brennan's conference room on a rainy April morning. My parents looked older, smaller, like all their arrogance had been drained away. Preston sat beside them, his Harvard confidence replaced with confusion and anger. "I want to know why," I said, looking directly at my mother. Beatrice's perfectly maintained facade finally cracked. "You were Helena's son. Every day, every single day, you looked more like her. Sterling loved her in a way he never loved me. I was the second choice, the practical choice. But Preston was mine, bought and paid for. He was supposed to be my vindication. So you punished me for being born. We gave you a life," Sterling said, his voice hollow. "A home, an education, a job. You gave me scraps from a table that should have been mine." Preston suddenly spoke up. "I didn't know. You have to believe me, Donovan. I had no idea I was adopted. I studied my brother, though I supposed he wasn't really my brother at all. I know. You were as much a victim as I was. That's why I'm not taking everything." My lawyer had advised against what I did next, but cruelty wasn't in my nature, despite what they'd done to me. I kept Harwick Industries, which was rightfully mine according to grandfather's will. I kept the family estate because it held memories of the grandfather who tried to protect my inheritance. But I made sure my parents kept their personal savings, their retirement accounts, enough to live comfortably. Preston kept his education, his car, and a trust fund of $2 million, enough to start over, to build something of his own. "Why?" my father asked, genuinely confused. "Why show mercy?" "Because I'm Helena's son," I said. "And from what I've learned about her, she would have wanted me to be better than you." Harwick Industries is now Helena Industries. I renamed it the day the papers were signed. Every truck, every mill, every business card now carries the name of the mother I never knew but who died, giving me life. The company has doubled in size in the 5 years since I took over. Turns out when you promote people based on merit rather than bloodlines, when you treat employees like family instead of treating family like employees, success follows. Preston moved to California. He started a small tech company, something completely separate from lumber and legacy. We exchange Christmas cards, nothing more. The distance helps us both pretend we never called each other brother. My parents live in a modest apartment in Burlington. I own the building, though they don't know that. I've instructed the property manager to never raise their rent, to fix any problem immediately, to make sure they're comfortable. It's not forgiveness. It's proof that I'm nothing like them. Nadira Kelvin, the woman who handed me that folder, still sends me a letter every year on March 15th, my real birthday. She always includes a photo of Helena, my birth mother. I looked just like her, same eyes, same stubborn jaw, same slight smile. She was beautiful, and according to everyone who knew her, she was kind. She was studying to be a teacher when she met my father. She wanted to help kids learn, to make a difference. She never got that chance, but her son owns a company that now funds scholarships for aspiring teachers across Vermont. Sophie, my daughter, is 13 now. She knows the whole story, knows that family isn't about blood or money or last names. It's about truth and choice and showing up. She'll inherit Helena Industries someday, not because she's entitled to it, but because she's already learning the business, already showing the intelligence and work ethic that would make both her grandmothers proud, the one she knows and the one she never met. Some nights I drive past the old estate. Another family lives there now, making their own memories in those rooms where I learned that love was conditional and birthright was negotiable. I don't feel bitter anymore. I feel grateful. Grateful that Cordelia spent 20 years fighting for me from the shadows. Grateful that Nadira had the courage to approach me that night. Grateful that my grandfather had the foresight to protect what he'd built from his own son's worst impulses. The truth about family fortunes is that they're never really about money. They're about power, control, and the stories we tell ourselves about who deserves what. My parents told themselves a story where I was an obligation and Preston was a choice. But the real story, the one written in DNA and legal documents and midnight tears, was that I was always the true heir. Not because I was born first, but because I was born at all. The stranger who gave me that folder that night gave me more than evidence. She gave me permission to stop trying to earn something that was already mine. And in the end, that's the greatest inheritance of all. The knowledge that you were always enough. Even when the people who should have loved you most tried to convince you otherwise. If you've made it this far in my story, you probably understand something about family betrayal, about being overlooked, about fighting for what's yours. Remember this: the truth always finds a way to surface. It might take 20 years and a stranger in a parking lot, but justice has a way of keeping perfect books. Your worth isn't determined by who chooses you. It's determined by who you choose to become despite them. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you faced your own family struggles or inheritance battles, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Please share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they're not alone in facing family rejection. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about truth, justice, and the complicated mess we call family. Sometimes the best revenge isn't taking everything from those who wronged you. It's building something better with what was always rightfully yours.